So good evening, everybody, and welcome to our seminar on Erben's Kytice, or more precisely on the second edition of Susan Reynolds' translation of the work, which has been beautifully illustrated by Míla Fürstová. And it's my great pleasure to welcome both ladies here tonight. Good evening. And I'm going to talk to them in just a second. Before I start, I would like to thank, first of all, the Czech Embassy in Dublin for their generous financial support of this event. Without it, we wouldn't be here. And I also would like to thank the Center for Literary and Cultural Translation for allowing us to use this lovely and comfortable venue. So thank you for that. And now, before we start the interview or the seminar, just a few words about the Czech National Revival to put Erben and his book into context. So the book we're talking about is Kytice, which is usually translated as a bouquet of flowers, a bouquet of tales. That's what it is. And Karel Jaromír Erben is the author. The Czech National Revival began as a language movement in the late 18th century, and the first revivalists, including Josef Dobrovský, to give you at least one significant name from that time, conducted their scholarly work through German. So that was the first generation, and their successors from the next generation onwards would gradually find the means and the confidence to write about the Czech language and Czech literature in Czech. And the most notable representative of this generation was Josef Jungmann. And if you go to the Czech Republic, you will find many streets and places named after these two men, Dobrovský and Jungmann. And Jungmann wrote, for example, the history of Czech literature, and also he put together a 5-volume Czech English dictionary, and these were published in 1825 and 1835 respectively. And so the first part of the revivalist movement was focused on the language. And once the language had been sufficiently awakened, that's another word that's used in relation to this movement, meaning sufficiently elevated from its limited oral form, in which it had been surviving for about 200 years, literary works began to be written and Czech national literature created. And this is where Kytice comes into the picture. Kytice was first published in 1853, and it was one of the most important works to be written at that time. Erben, the author, was by profession a lawyer, later an archivist, and he had been he had a keen interest in music and folklore, and he collected folklore songs and tales, which he edited and published. His book of scary folk tales, Kytice, has come out in more than 200 editions to date, and continues to hold a very special place in the hearts of the Czech people, of the Czech readers. Together with Božena Němcová's Babička, and we have it here as well. We will talk about that more later, which was published only 2 years after Kytice in 1855. It is deemed to represent the spirit of the Czech nation. And as such, it is a true national treasure. It is a book that people always turned to in times of hardship, for example, during the Nazi occupation of the country. And we have actually an edition from 1942 here, which I will ask Vera to show later, a 1942 edition of Kytice. And that was a very special year before the assassination of Heydrich, when it was still possible to publish Czech works. But this continued during the communist regime and so on. People were looking to these two books for some the word escapes me now Comfort, thank you. So Kytice has come out in more than 200 editions and Babička in more than 300 editions, and that's Czech editions. So that tells you how important these books are. And until very, very recently, Kytice was never translated into English. So we were talking about it with Anglophone students, but they didn't really know what it was exactly. So it is now, thanks to Susan's wonderful translation, that we can finally talk about it in concrete terms. The work has inspired a number of works of art from other fields. Classical music lovers will know, for example, Dvořák's symphonic poem, The Water Goblin, and so on. And something more recent, in 2000, the work was adapted to the big screen by F.A. Brabec, and that's a beautiful film adaptation, beautiful film called Kytice. So it is this work, the work of this magnitude, the national treasure, that Susan Reynolds has bravely decided to translate into English, and Míla Fürstová has equally bravely decided to illustrate. And they have come to talk to us about it tonight, so it's great to see them both here. Let me introduce them a little bit more. Susan Reynolds was born in Manchester and educated at Lady Margaret Hall, Oxford. During her time at Oxford, she also worked as a freelance music critic, and this is important, on The Guardian. And she studied Czech independently after developing a special interest in Janáček's operas. She has also published articles on Goethe and Czech literature, and on Thomas Mann and Czechoslovakia, which were awarded prizes. She has also lectured, and among other things, on various aspects of Czech-German cultural relations. And this is important, relevant to us tonight, because, of course, the works that were written during the Czech national revival were written at the time when the Czech lands were part of the Austrian Empire. So Czech-German language and cultural relations and tensions were a topical issue, and they were being scrutinized and interrogated. Susan is a regular contributor to the British Czech and Slovak Review. She won the British Czech and Slovak Association's first essay prize with an article on George Eliot and Prague, for example. And from 2004 to 2014, she was a curator of Czech, Slovak and Lusatian at the British Library, where she still works. She now works in research services. Her many translations include poems by the Czech poets Jan Neruda and Jaroslav Seifert. So she seems to focus on the national treasures and the national poets and so on, which is great. And her translations into English of Kytice and Babička, grandmother, are amongst her latest projects. And Míla Fürstová is an award-winning internationally exhibit artist who has had solo shows in many countries, including Great Britain, the United States, France, and the Czech Republic. Not Ireland. Sorry, not Ireland.
Here we go.
Yeah. So next time it will be on the list. And during this time, she has won 14 prestigious awards, and her work has become part of important private and public collections, including that of Queen Elizabeth II, Václav Havel, Coldplay, and the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. And it has featured in numerous publications. Míla was born in Czechoslovakia, and she gained her MA degree from Charles University in Prague, where she studied art, English, and psychology. And simultaneously, she studied for her BA degree in fine art printmaking at the University of Gloucestershire. In 2001, she received her master's degree at the Royal College of Art, and subsequently lectured at Coventry University and the University of Gloucestershire. In 2003, she was appointed the first artist in residence at the Cheltenham Ladies College, where she founded and ran an etching studio till 2010. And it was at this point, at this moment, that she decided to stop teaching and become a full-time artist, freelance artist. 4 years later, Míla's work reached over 400 million people when she was commissioned to make the artwork for the Coldplay Ghost Stories album and 4 singles. In 2019, Míla was commissioned by Jantar Publishing to make illustrations for Erben's Kytice and later also for Němcová's Babička. So these books are among her latest projects. So once again, good evening. And Susan, I'll turn to you first. So you studied Czech at Oxford.
Yes.
Did this include literature as well?
It did. And in fact, I didn't study officially because my first degree was actually in classics. And I've always maintained that once you mastered ancient Greek grammar, no other, not even Czech, can really terrify you. So there's no good foundation to build on. Yes, well, I don't Irish yet. Have to have something to look forward to. Yes. And yes, as Jan's mentioned, I had been working as a freelance music critic for The Guardian. And this was in the 70s, at the time when Sir Charles Mackerras was first introducing Janáček's operas to a wider public. The first one I saw was Pistouška. I was completely bowled over by it. And when I read about how Janáček tried to translate natural sounds and human speech patterns into music, I thought I'd appreciate his music even better if I had some grasp of the language. And I did have some knowledge of Russian and Polish to build on, but I had to study independently. And in those days, you didn't meet many Czechs. So it wasn't until the early 1990s that I actually went to Prague for the first time, literally in the last days of the old Czechoslovakia. I remember this particularly because my daughter had her 10th birthday on Christmas Eve, 1992. And before we went out, I was talking to a friend and lamenting the fact that I had never had a chance to learn to speak Czech properly, and I had a largely passive knowledge of the language. And he had a colleague, he said, who taught Czech in the university, and I should go to his classes. Oh, no, I said, he's got lots of real students. He won't want me to see his time. Nonsense, he said. Here he is, speak to him. And he handed me the receiver. And this rather bemused Scottish voice said, yes, yes, by all means, come along. And this was James Norton, author of Colloquial Czech. Now, because of family commitments, the only class I could go to with any regularity were those on Macha's Mai. And so I got to know that particular text very well indeed. And I was also later able to attend his Czech text classes, which looked at texts all the way from medieval Czech right through the 20th century, including, of course, Kytice. And I was enraptured by this because, of course, I knew of the poems, but I had never been able to find a translation of them. And I wondered why nobody had ever tried to translate such an important and significant work. And Jim very kindly gave me a little copy of it as a Christmas present. And then I began to understand why, because each one of those 13 poems is in a different meter and a different rhyme scheme. Now, of course, Erben was a musician, very much so, as well as a man of letters. And when you read the poems, immediately you're struck by the musicality of the verses. And many English readers who think they know nothing of Czech literature will, of course, as Jana said, have heard the Dvořák's symphonic ballads. If you listen to them, you realize that although he doesn't actually set the words, except, of course, in the case of The Spectre's Bride, which received its premiere in Birmingham, but he does quite often write fragments of the text in the margin. And you can actually hear echoes of the words in the music. So any translation has to reproduce this. For example, the Song of the Water Goblin, which begins Vodnik, or those 4 sinister notes, dum, 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 desem ditya, give that child here. It has to have this heavy, weighty, sinister sound to it. And the English translator is handicapped to some degree by the fact that the stress in Czech normally falls on the first syllable. Every line starts with a solid downbeat. In English, it isn't always so predictable. Sometimes, of course, I simply couldn't reproduce this in English. I did the best I could. What I could do was reproduce the rhyme scheme and, as far as I could, the meter in each one of those 13 poems. Now, some of them, of course, are much shorter than others. Which, case in point. But those short ones have a very, very tight rhyme scheme. And because you cannot afford to sacrifice anything, they're very demanding. This isn't to say you can allow yourself to get sloppy with one of the longer poems, but you notice it far more in a short and concentrated poem. So that was one of the challenges I faced, and I was so grateful to have had this grounding in the background to the National Revival, which became one of my great interests. And that really fed into my translation of the poems. I had this awareness of where they were coming from, why it was they were so important to the Czech nation. It felt something of a liberty, something of a risk to take on the translation of such an important work. But the alternative was leave it unknown to those who couldn't read Czech. So did I have a choice?
Yeah,
I'm very glad that I tried.
Thank you very much. Míla, when did you first come into contact with Kytice?
Well, I was at the residence of the Czech ambassador in London, and there was a crowd of people. And next to me, among loads and loads of people, totally accidentally, stood this lovely man called Mike Tate, who is the director of Jantar. And we started chatting. And very early on, he showed off. He was so happy because he very recently published Kytice in New York, where it became where it sort of was placed among the 40 most read titles. You know, it had a huge success, and I was fascinated, and I just thought, Czech, as Susan says, it's just, Kytice, as you say, it's so Czech. It's, I read it as a young child. I felt that it's one of the most Czech things that one can read, and I just could not comprehend how that can be translated into English, and was very jubilant about it. I thought it was wonderful that us as quite small nations, I don't know how understood we are in the world context, but I thought this is a wonderful, wonderful thing to be happening, and I congratulated him, and was really, really impressed with what he was doing. And very soon after, he came to me, having looked through my work, and he asked me if I would do the cover for Kytice. And I was, it was mixed feelings, basically. I was honored, but obviously Kytice is all about horror. And that's, kind of when you see, I kind of consider myself a bit more gentle than horror. And often as an artist, I had a problem with it. When I was at the Royal College, I almost was going to always ask, why am I not more sort of serious? Why am I, why there's no more pain, or something kind of quite arty? And I just thought that gentleness actually is a very valid voice, and that's how I want to be, and I stuck with it. But I don't know how I would translate that into Kytice. But at the end, we talked with Mike, and he said, okay, let's go for Zlatý kolovrat. And that's, great deal of romance there. You can sort of obscure the horrible bits and stuff. So we agreed on that. And I was so pleased, and I did it with real joy. And we had a cover for Kytice, and I handed it in, and then he called me, and he said, "Would you do the whole book?" And I said, "But Mike, I am not an illustrator. I know a lot of very wonderful people who studied illustration for 7 years, and for every day of these 7 years they are told how to do it, and I haven't been taught anything, so I just felt like GP who is suddenly proposed heart surgery, and I'll be found out if I, so there was kind of one aspect of it, and again the horror of it, and because I just thought, okay, I have chosen one romantic story, I can't possibly navigate whole Kytice and avoid the terror of it. And I sort of tried to be polite, and I said, I'll mull this over. And then COVID came, and I just felt, such sorrow. I had all these tickets bought to go to Czech Republic, and I couldn't go, and I felt so isolated. And I suddenly wanted to run into arms of Mr. Erben, with his horror. and that's what I did. And I kind of had Mike wanted me to illustrate. He said, choose the poems you want. Let's agree on about 8 illustrations, because also I work with a very ancient technique. It's a medieval technique of etching, and it takes years to, it's just
we'll
really,
talk about that in detail later.
But he started about 4, and he said, choose other ones. And then I just basically chosen the ones with happy ending, so that's how they're selected. And then, so it was 7, we agreed on 7. And then when I finished the 7 works, I laid them out on the floor of my studio, and I suddenly saw one connecting thing between all of them. Do you know, it's all women being punished. Women are being punished in all the 7 illustrations, and most of Kytice.
And that's one of the things I was going to ask you, because you obviously had memories of reading Kytice as a child, and now you were being asked as an adult, as a grown-up woman, an artist, to engage with it. So you saw different things in it.
Yes, I did. Yeah, it was wonderful. I just think it was so wonderfully contemporary, and and as a grown-up woman, I experienced it totally differently. I felt so angry with that young woman who leaves her child in the lake. I mean, it's there's a side, Vodník, water goblin, kind of goes to retrieve his baby, and her mother locks her daughter in the house. So there's like a fight between Vodník and the mother, and then the daughter is there without agency. And I thought, she really needed to be more grown up. Whilst I thought, for example, in Svatební košile, the female protagonist was a bit more grown up, because she suddenly sort of stood on her hand, on her feet, and kind of acted with a bit more agency. So just coming back, so there was a lot of women being punished, and I decided to do one extra illustration of Záhořovo lože, just to punish the men as well.
Yeah, thank you. So it's interesting that you were basically coming to the work from 2 different angles, that you had childhood memories of reading the book and growing up with it and being aware that it's a national treasure. And Susan, who was able to speak Czech and who was able to appreciate it and saw the beauty and worth of it, wanted others to be able to appreciate it as well. So that's really nice. And there are actually, I should clarify, there are actually two editions. And I mentioned that at the beginning, but just to, we have a visual proof. So this was first. This is the bilingual edition. And it's a beautiful little book, which you can almost, I think it's the size of gospel books. They used to be, that were supposed to be pocket books. So yeah. So it's really nice, really beautiful, the font and everything. It's a beautiful book, and it's the bilingual edition. And so that has Susan's translation, of course, and also Susan's introduction, which is marvelous, and which, first of all, betrays her erudite knowledge of the subject, but it's also very poetic, very personal, I felt, in a very nice way. And it also reminds us, or it sort of inherently shows that the best translations, and this really is a marvelous translation, are done by those who are respectful of the original, and who I would say humbly put their art and skill at the service of the original and the work and the author. So the introduction is wonderful, and Susan also talks about the music of the words, and the fact that Erben himself was interested in music. I'm just mentioning that again because it's really important, and also to make that point that when we translate, we don't just translate words, do we? It's there is so much more that a good translation needs to convey. And for a work like this, which is a 19th century treasure, and it's derived from folk art and folk legends and tales, and it's written in verse, there are so many challenges. And so to translate it successfully is to show an understanding of not just the words, but the message of the original work, the the music and the essence of the whole context that it emerged from. So all that is contained here. And I know, Susan, that you really engaged with the music of the words. And I know that you once said that when you were translating, that you were working on the translation, you were walking around your study and reciting it to yourself.
Yes,
aloud.
right. Because well, let's remember these poems do spring from an oral tradition. They're not meant to lie flat on the page. They're meant to be read aloud, to be spoken. And quite often it would happen if I'd been sitting over some tricky passage for a long time. As soon as I got up and started to move around, then it would fall into place and I knew how it should sound. And of course, I came from a very different foreign tradition, but there've been all kinds of strands which were immensely helpful in approaching this, because as a foreigner, I cannot lay claim to know everything about the whole Czech tradition from which it sprung, but there were other things which fed into my translation, which I think made it accessible to other readers as well. One of them, of course, was having a background not only in classic poetry, but also in the ballad tradition, reading, for example, the border ballads, which have a similar kind of resonance for a British reader. And again, all the mythological symbols as well, as Erben points out in his notes, which are translated in this edition, though not in the first one. Many of these stories and symbols have parallels in different cultures. For example, he talks about the idea of the vampire bridegroom having parallels in Breton folklore and in Serbian folklore as well. So if you translate these in a way that speaks to as many different cultural traditions as possible, while preserving as far as possible their essential Czechness, then I think it goes some way towards doing what Erben would have wished. I was lucky enough as a child to have read Czech fairy tales. There was a wonderful series of fairy tales and folk tales in many countries. I think they were edited by Barbara Leone Pickard. For example, there were Tales from Czechoslovakia was one I read when I was very young, and Tales from Sweden, Tales from Norway. And these fascinated me. And even earlier than that, when I was a very small girl, before I'd even started school, my father, who was a schoolmaster, when he realized I could read, would bring home books from school so I could enjoy those. And two which left a particularly vivid imprint on me were Tales of the Greek Heroes and Legends of the Norsemen. So almost from the moment I could read, these were nourishing my poetic awareness, and I was able to draw on them when in my turn I came to translate these.
Okay, thank you very much. So we touched there partly also on the oral origin of these tales, and that's what you were trying to tap into when you were reciting them yourself to see if they sound right. So this brings us to a reading. I think we have to give you a sample of what the tale, what one of the tales at least sounds like, and we're going to read from Svatební košile, the wedding shirts, from this bilingual edition. And I'm going to wait for an image to come, or maybe has it just been, or we can find it in the book. I think it's just been. And it's there in 4 different forms. That's this one. Yeah. So that's the wedding shirt. And Míla has also brought the and there is the 1942. And when we've done the reading, Míla is going to talk about her work on the illustration. So the wedding shirt. Svatební košile. Již 11. odbyla a lampa ještě svítila a lampa ještě hořela, co nad klekadlem visela.
A picture of God's mother hung. The clock had struck 11 at night, and still the lamp was shining bright, and still the lamp was burning clear over the prie-dieu hanging near.
Na stěně nízké světničky byl obraz boží rodičky. Rodičky boží s děťátkem, tak jako růže s poupátkem.
A picture of God's mother hung, God's mother with her little son. Upon the wall of that low room, a rosebud with a rose in bloom.
A před tou mocnou světicí viděti panu klečící. Klečela, líce skloněné, ruce na prsa složené. Slzy jí z očí padaly. želem se ňádra zdvíhaly. A když slzička upadla, v ty bílé ňádra zapadla.
Before the Almighty Virgin there, a girl was kneeling, deep in prayer, head bowed in supplication lost. Upon her breast her hands lay crossed. The tears were falling from her eyes, her bosom heaved with anguished sighs. Each tear that dropped fell down to rest and disappeared on that white breast.
Žel Bohu, kde můj tatíček, již na něm roste trávníček. Žel Bohu, kde má matička, tam leží podlé tatíčka. Sestra do roka nežila, bratra mi koule zabila.
Where is my father now, alas? Over his body grows the grass. Alas, where is my mother? Where? She's lying by my father there. My sister died within the year. A bullet killed my brother dear.
Měla jsem smutná milého, život bych dala pro něho. Do ciziny se obrátil, potud se ještě nevrátil.
I had a sweetheart to my sorrow. I would have died for him tomorrow. To foreign lands he went away and hasn't come back to this day.
Do ciziny se ubíral, těšil mě, slzy utíral. Zasej má milá, zasej len, vzpomínej na mě každý den. První rok přádla hledívej, druhý rok plátno polívej, třetí košile vyšívej. Až ty košile ušiješ, věneček z routy pověš.
He went away to foreign lands and dried my tears with soothing hands. Now sow some flaxseed, darling, see, and every day remember me. The first year, set about the spinning. The second, dump and bleach the linen, and sew shirts when the third's beginning. And when those shirts are finished, you shall weave yourself a crown of rue.
Již jsem košile ušila, již jsem je v truhle složila, již moje routa v odkvětě a milý ještě ve světě šírém, širokém, co kámen v moři hlubokém. 3 léta o něm ani sluch, živli a zdráv zná milý Bůh.
It's finished. All the shirts I sewed are safely in my hope chest stowed. My crown's already dry and sere, and still my sweetheart is not here. Out in the wide, wide world is he, a stone lost deep beneath the sea. 3 years since news of him arrived. God only knows if he's alive.
Maria, Pano přemocná, ach, budíš ty mi pomocná. Vrať mi milého z ciziny, květ blaha mého jediný. Milého z ciziny mi vrať, a neb život můj náhle zkrať.
O Virgin Mary, rich in power, support me, help me in this hour. Bring back my love from foreign parts, the one flower to rejoice my heart. Bring back my sweetheart from abroad, or cut my life and suffering short.
U něho život jarý květ, bez něho však mě mrzí svět. Maria, matko milosti, buď pomocnicí v žalosti.
With him my life's a flower in spring, without the world's a frozen thing. O Mary, mother of relief, bring help and comfort in my grief.
Pohnul se obraz na stěně, i skřikla Pana zděšeně. Lampa, co temně hořela, prskla a zhasla docela. Možná, že větru tažení, možná i zlé, že znamení.
The picture moved upon the wall. The girl cried out in fear, appalled. The lamp, whose flame was burning weakly, sputtered and then went out completely. A draught of wind that blew it out, a sign that evil was about.
A slyš, na záspí kroků zvuk a na okénko ťuk, ťuk, ťuk. Spíš, má panenko, nebo bdíš? Hoj, má panenko, tu jsem již. Hoj, má panenko, co děláš? Zdali pak mě ještě znáš? A neb jiného v srdci máš?
Hark, on the porch a footfall came and tapped up on the window frame. Are you awake or sleeping, dear? Hey there, my lass, it's me, I'm here. Hey there, lass, what are you about? Do you still know me, not a doubt, or has another cut me out?
Ach, můj milý, ach, pro nebe, tu dobu myslím na tebe. Na tě jsem vždycky myslela, za tě se právě modlila.
My sweetheart, oh, by heaven above, I've just been thinking of you, love. I thought about you every day. For you, this moment I did pray.
Ho, nech modlení, skoč a pojď a mě doprovoď. Měsíček svítí na cestu, já přišel pro svou nevěstu.
Ha, leave your praying, let it be. Come to it, come and follow me. The moon is shining as our guide, and I have come to fetch my bride.
Ach, pro Boha, ach, co pravíš? Kamž bychom šli, tak pozdějiš. Vítr burácí, pustá noc. Počkej jen do dne, není moc.
What do you mean? For heaven's sake, where should we go? It's come too late. The night is bleak, the wind blows strong. Wait no day, it isn't long.
Ho, den je noc a noc je den. Ve dne mé oči tlačí sen. Dřív než se zbudí kohouti, musím tě za svou pojmouti. Jen neprodlévej, skoč a pojď. Dnes ještě budeš moje choť.
Ah, night is day and day is night. Dreams bring my eyes down when it's light. Before the cockerels do wake, you as my own bride I must take. Jump to it now and don't delay. You'll be my wife this very day.
Byla noc, byla hluboká, měsíček svítil z vysoka a ticho, pusto v dědině. Vítr burácel jedině.
It was the deepest hour of night. The moon was shining from the heights. The village was all silent, bleak, but for the stormy wind's wild shriek.
A on tu napřed, skok a skok, a ona za ním, co jí krok. Psi houfem ve vsi zavili, když ty pocestné zvětřili. A vili divnou věc, že tě na blízku umrlec.
By leaps and bounds he went ahead, and after him the girl did tread. The dogs were howling as they went, as they picked up the traveller's scent. They howled and howled, a curious cry, to say a dead man was nearby.
Pěkná noc, jasná, v tu dobu vstávají mrtví ze hrobů. A nežli zvíš, jsou tobě blíž. Má milá, nic se nebojíš?
A fine clear night, about this time, out of their graves the dead do climb. Before you know it, they are near. My darling, do you feel no fear?
Thank you. So I think you can hear that it will really make people want to engage with these tales because they are as exciting as they are in the original. Susan, would you like to comment on any specific aspect of this tale that that was a challenge for you?
Well, this was the very one that I started with. And of course, if I'd known what I know now, perhaps I wouldn't have been so bold. But I've got a little green exercise book labeled Translations. And in the very first page of 2 lines from the middle of this, when the girl realizes that her bridegroom is not what he seems. And that was a core from which the whole thing sprang. Now, of course, it has, as you heard, both in the Czech and the English, this very specific meter and rhyme scheme, and it follows, for example, the course of the 2 travellers as they go along by leaps and bounds. There's a certain element of repetition as well, which you have to mirror in the English. And I hope I managed to do this. Sometimes there are slight variations on it as well, as a passage beyond this one, where they leap over the churchyard gate. And it's the subtleties of this, which are something you have to watch out for, where it's a complete repetition, where it's very similar, but not an exact one too. And to reflect this in the English is something which I think is essential if you're going to convey the spirit and the form and the intention of Erben's poetry.
Thank you very much. Yeah, there certainly are refrains in these tales. So that's the music part of the music, isn't it? Míla, how did you approach creating the illustration for this tale? You have brought the
so this is the illustrations are quite large in original,
and it's full of detail. I find that the longer I look at it, the more I see. It's incredible. So could you tell us how you came up with all the detail, what the process is?
Well, first of all, absolutely incredible translation. I really, one really feels it in their heart. So my heart comes down to you, Susan. And with this, basically the whole book was produced in the technique of etching. I don't know how many of you know about etching. It's a technique from 15th century. I work on metal plate. I have even brought one here, actually, so I'm just going to carry this. Can I move? Am I allowed to move? I've got one. I work on metal plate, on zinc. I like to pass it around. They left me in the aircraft with this weapon.
Yeah. Wow.
The needle. So if you imagine a zinc plate like this, but this size, and what I do, I heat it up and I roll wax on it. The wax is pale brown initially. When the wax cools down, I turn it around, and in really kind of illegal conditions, I smoke it with candle.
We're going to show the video, I think. Shall we show the video?
Yes, we can. Yes, there's
So okay, so you can keep talking, and the video will be
Okay,
available in a second. Maybe I'll And we're playing it without sound, is that right, James? So that you can comment, Míla?
Okay. So this, I suppose, suggests the initial, yes, this is working on the metal plate, clearing the zinc, polishing it from scratches. So the whole process is very, very technical. Here you can see the pale brown wax, and here this is not how it should be done, but that's how I do it. I don't try that. And when I taught at the ladies' college, we had to evacuate quite a few times. I got to be called trouble then. So and here you can see already with this needle, drawing the individual lines onto the plate. Now, where the needle penetrates the wax, it gets exposed, and I then put the whole thing in the bath of acid when my children are not at home. And the feather kind of helps the acid bite. Then I pull it out, wash it with water, and at this stage those lines have been preserved in the plate. They can become deep. And I need to clear. Okay, this right. It's jumped over. It totally jumped over a bit where the plate, the ink is being applied and pushed into the lines, and this is printed on wet paper. And this is such a sort of moment of magic that I see for the first time what's happening. And I print on different colored paper, and sort of, I can, and then at the end I do the highlights with hand painting, and you can see how many how many different versions we were working with for Kytice. So this is my studio in Cheltenham, and this is book club. It's a very, very old technique, but absolutely wonderful in a way that, as you can see, if you start on the black paper or on black plate, in a way, I sometimes find it that you have to be almost a bit too godlike to start on white paper, As an artist, I often, if I come among people that I don't know, they say, "Oh, draw something." But I just can never draw in front of anyone, and white paper can intimidate me, but on black, it sort of seems that I can kind of feel my way through the better. And actually, with Erben's work, it's so dark, and somehow it's kind of quite natural that it comes from the darkness and sort of emerges. So with each of these, I would, spend a few weeks to make them, and then print them in different color, and decide later on with the publisher which color version we're going to go for. And here, here is the original of the Svatební košile, and I have chosen, once kind of faced with the prospect of making justice to such an extraordinary poem, I thought there was so many powerful moments in there, and even, like the very beginning where the young maiden prays, so powerful and beautiful, or later on when the couple flies over the landscape, just the sort of bird view of Czech landscape, powerful again, or the cemetery itself, but I thought for me, what was really, really interesting was the kind of the relationship between the two of them, and how, initially it kind of starts with this sort of quite erotic power. She really desires him, she wants him, and she's kind of, he literally takes her off her feet, and she goes with him. And like in real life, sometimes it's really a bad idea. And this didn't happen to me. And So she, she follows, and she's kind of armed with her faith, and she's very confident about her faith. She's almost kind of bargaining with God. Give me my loved one, or take my life away. How arrogant is that? So it's but very
dangerous.
Youthful. And so I just think there is so many wonderful aspects in there. And she kind of, so she is carried away by him, but she still has that faith. And I kind of try to use blue and red as it comes to such as her warmth, the hope, the Christianity, the belief, and him, the deadly sort of realm. And here, obviously, Mother Mary, that she whatever happens, she actually still focuses on her, on the Christianity. What else? Well, that's all. I don't know if you have any questions.
How much Czechness would you say is in there? Because we're here talking about the translation of the text. Do you feel that when you were planning your illustrations for this book, that you were thinking, I have to translate this somehow with my art for the foreign audience? Was that an aspect of it at all?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, interestingly, when I first arrived in Britain, so I was studying at the Charles University, and my course proved to be really quite theoretical, and I can't get my hands dirty at all, which made me terribly unhappy. And I had to, and I came to England, and my English was very behind. and I came to England, and I suddenly realized that I could study 2 university degrees at the same time better, because I kind of do my passion. I'm dirty, and I'm learning language by kind of sideways. And at that time, I was thinking, this is going to be artistically my English period. I was kind of waiting, it's going to come, and I was there for a year, and some of my fellow students went to Prague for a visit, and they came back and they said, your work is so Czech. And I said, no, this is my English. And so that answers the question, really. I think that whatever I do, I think I kind of learned through my career that I just need to be honest, and then the thing comes itself. And because I am so Czech, I am. I'm not trying even not to be Czech, but if I'm trying, if I'm trying,
you couldn't if you tried.
Yeah, exactly. So I just thought that will come naturally, and I was pleased that Mike Tate of Jantar sort of selected a Czech artist for that, because together with Susan's incredible translation, I think that we just kind of embrace the heart of it.
Perfect combination. Yes. And you were also saying that you're not using words, so in a way art is kind of a different realm, isn't it? Visual art.
No, I always thought that with language we I mean, Susan is an extraordinary, and Erben extraordinary example of how language can be used. But it's not always like that. Sometimes, like I always think that words in language kind of limit the meaning as much as they deliver them. And actually in fine art, sometimes it's kind of like pre-words, it's the meaning is there kind of wider. And that's how I've been very lucky that over my career, a lot of people from different parts of the world would contact me and say, this speaks to me and stuff. So there's no language needed. It's kind of communicates on a more direct level. So that's why I wanted to reach, communicate directly from my experience of Czech, of being Czech, but of also reading Kytice as a very young girl.
And I think, I don't know if everybody would agree that when we're looking, for example, at this illustration, there's a universal element to it, but you can also see the Czech elements when you look at the church spire, for example, and so on. Okay, do we have any questions about this, or we can, Míla will be happy to come back to it maybe at the end. So the Czechness, so we've talked about the music of the language of Erben, and also I think we should mention there is a lot of love in it, isn't there? Because Erben wrote it with love, and you translated it with love, and you illustrated it with love. And it's my immense pleasure to be here talking about it tonight as well. And also I wanted to mention, and this is partly bringing us to the point about what this project has done, that the bilingual edition, maybe what first comes to mind is that it's a translation of a Czech work into English, so it's for the Anglophone readers. But I think it's for the Czech readers as well, because it's it kind of makes you realize the importance of the words, of the music and everything that we've talked about. And especially if it's done in such a beautiful edition, it's for everybody, and it's for people who know the work, because suddenly they see it afresh, and it's for people who have never seen it, read it, and they realize how interesting and exciting it is. And I think it's one of the things that this project has done, that it's going to make it exciting and attractive and of interest to many readers. And I just wanted to mention one thing. I was recently reading Kytice with teenage students, Czech students, and there are some people, teachers here from the Czech school, Saturday Czech school in Dublin, and we have a small class of teenagers who are preparing for the Leaving Cert in Czech. And I was reading Kytice with them last year, and we were actually focusing on the wedding shirts. And it was wonderful to see how they connected to it. I was a bit worried about it. They were a bit worried about it for different reasons. They were worried because they knew it was a 19th century book, and they thought they wouldn't be able to understand it because they are young people who live here and who are trying to keep their Czech. And I was a bit worried that maybe, you know, they will find it too archaic or whatever, because people have sometimes preconceptions like that, but they were really excited about it. And there was no problem with the language, because it's written in such clear language, musical, all the things that we've demonstrated here. So it's by no means an old book that would be of no relevance anymore. And it was such a pity for such a long time that there was no English translation. So it's great that we have it now. I don't know if we might. Was there anything else, Susan, that you wanted to say about the Czechness of the text? Yes, that you had to engage with?
Yes, I was lucky enough to have a Czech friend in Oxford, Vanda Pickett, who is the language assistant there, and she was able to help me with some of the more obscure things like tree names as well, which weren't in a dictionary. And at the moment, I'm engaged on a translation of Babička, and I found it immensely encouraging that the Božena Němcová Museum actually has a glossary page on its website, because not even Czech speakers know all the plant names and everything at first sight. And it is this Czechness which I think is the wonderful thing that Míla has managed to capture in her illustrations. And having visited the Czech countryside, as soon as I saw these illustrations, of course, it evoked so many scenes which I'd seen. And I hoped that in my translation, I managed at the same time to convey something of this very specific locality, the nature of the landscape, the way that Erben describes, for example, the hillsides and the rocky crags, particularly, for example, at the beginning of Bouquet, the Treasure, where we see this road to the church with the sheer cliffs and the drops, or again in where we have this forest with the brambles and this thicket from which the arm reaches out. Or again, in Zlatý Kolovrat, the forest in which Podolnička is membered and put together again. And I hoped that in my translation, I managed to evoke something of the spirit of these forests and cliffs. It's, of course, impossible to do so without evoking something similar in the English language, or perhaps a Scottish reader or an Irish reader that creates something quite different. Terms like where it was scree, and you think immediately of those hillsides and sky with the rocks tumbling down them. So I hope that I've managed to convey something of the Czechness of these specific landscapes in a way that a non-Czech reader can immediately visualize. And I do hope if I haven't, you'll be very honest and tell me so.
I think you have. And I think that we can say that basically the translation continues the revivalist effort. I hope it doesn't sound too cheesy or something to say that, but I really feel that because it was the aim of the revivalists and people like Erben to show what Czech language can do and to prove that the Czech nation has its place and Czech culture is worthy of the world's attention, same as German language culture and so on. So now we are showing the world that these tales are worthy of its attention.
Yes. The thing I'd like to say, first of all, it's never to give up on all kinds of levels, because it took me longer to find a publisher than it did to translate the poems. There were a couple of false starts before we finally met up with Mike, and he did this wonderful job of it. But also, I found it immensely encouraging to remember that Dostoevsky himself at the end of the 18th century was very pessimistic about the survival of Czech as a literary language. Almost exactly 200 years later, the Nobel Prize for Literature was awarded for the first time to a Czech writer writing in Czech, Jaroslav Seifert. So, you see, all was not lost.
Yeah, never give up. And Míla, you have brought another one or two illustrations for us to look at. I think, do you have Poklad, the treasure?
I do have. Oh yeah, thank you. So that's Poklad.
Oh, and we have to comment on the yellow because it's so beautiful. The yellow cover.
Yeah, I just thought that with Poklad in particular, I just wanted to express the warmth that the mother feels for her child, and there were some, we sort of used about half illustration in the colder versions. There were like the night settings and about half in this sort of warmth, and obviously somewhere like Apollinaire, the noon, which would be yellow just to express the heat. So here is the moment where she rediscovers her child after he has been
her greatest treasure.
Yes, yeah, and that's how kind of talking about doing things with love. I think this is probably the image that I could relate to the most as a mother of young children myself. So I thought this this really came from heart.
Yeah.
And I think I've got another one with this leg still here.
Oh, that's the noon witch.
That's the noon witch, yeah. So again, kind of technically, you can imagine it's a silver plate, and then I'm kind of trying to push different inks into different areas and essentially kind of paint and keep the inks apart. So it's always, the moment that I'm kind of peeling the paper off. I don't really know what's going to happen. I'm hoping for the best, but so it's there's always an element of surprise in there.
And is it usually a good surprise?
No. It is. But I have cried.
Okay, so there's sometimes disappointments.
Yeah, no, actually, because I have to print on wet paper, so that the paper has to be kind of pressed really deeply into those lines. It's to kind of to extract the ink that I pushed into the lines, and sometimes the paper buckles or it tears, and I've kind of spent quite a long time inking it up, and suddenly the whole thing doesn't exist. It's just torn out. But you're right. No, I was just joking. It is mostly wonderful surprise. It's just, I think that's the kind of the element of play, and I think that for all of us, if we can ever have in our jobs an element of play, that's what kind of keeps us alive. And I can see like Susan marching around sort of singing and doing your poetry. That's there's such a vitality in it, and for me there is such joy in discovering these things, and obviously also on the plate when it's not everything is mirror image. So I have a mirror on my plate, and I have to kind of hold. There's sometimes some people don't normally come to my studio, but if somebody would see me or what's happening, it's not just the weird smoking with the candle. It's sometimes kind of marching around the studio, kind of with plate and a mirror to see what, how it's going to come out. So it's always a surprise when it's printed.
So it's a really complex process.
It's a very complex
And
process.
you said you spent several weeks on
each plate. Yeah, that's why that was another reason why I kind of hesitated on doing a whole book, because I just don't know whether I had it, whether I kind of had, it took 3/4 of a year to, so this is a major project, but with, with being locked in COVID, I thought that was kind of the best time how I could be connected deeply to Czech Republic whilst not being able to go there. Yeah, so I kind of think of it fondly now.
Thank you. And we should also mention the next project, at least briefly, which is Babička, grandmother. And Míla has already done her illustrations for it, and Susan is finishing her translation. So it's going to be another beautiful piece of art, language and visual. So you have now done 2 of the greatest treasures of of Czech literature. And Míla, you come from the same region as Němcová and Erben as well, and me.
Opposite order, yes.
Yeah, from the same town we discovered, Hradec Králové. And that's where in the region, that's where these works were. So I just thought of it now because you were talking about COVID. So that must have been important for you, kind of not being able to go, but revisiting the localities in your mind.
So I kind of felt that part of the COVID I was in Czech Republic, because I kind of I submerged myself into the imagery of Erben, and later on actually with Babička. That was the end of COVID. In fact, Czechs, you probably know how Czechs celebrated the end of COVID on Charles Bridge, and I kind of, went over there, and I didn't celebrate there. I wasn't quite so cool, but I just thought that's the end. And I decided with the Czech publisher Euromedia that I'll start on Babička, and that it will be translated by Susan and published by Jantar here. And I had a great plan. I was going to go to Ratibořické údolí, where it's based. And because I feel Babička is so intimately written, it just really touches my soul. It's no horror, no, it's just beautiful. And I had this brilliant idea of collecting pieces of nature, like of grasses and flowers, and using them in the etching. There's a technique. So here I demonstrate to you how I kind of how I draw with the needle. But there is also a different wax which is called soft ground, and when I have the wax, I cover the plate with the wax again, and then because the wax is soft, I can impress the actual natural materials into it. So I was going to impress half of Ratibořické údolí into it, and then and then kind of finish it with drawing, and I was ready, and tickets booked, and suddenly Czechs were the first in COVID, kind of we had the highest numbers, and I couldn't go. So I was so lost. And my husband Quentin, who is here, he helped me find Ratibořické údolí in Britain, in Gloucestershire. So it's like a bit of a stream with some sort of coniferous trees, and it's just so beautiful. And I kind of collected all the feathers and all the grasses there, and then I experimented, and I was impressing it into the metal. Sometimes it turned horrible when it was squeezed in the press. It kind of turned out like spinach, so I was just peeling it off and stuff. And I had even one sort of experience where I really been collecting grasses for 2 days. The moment came and I was impressing it in, and the whole thing went really, really wrong. And I just needed to do it again. So I got my scissors. I was in apron, a bit dirty, a lot dirty, very dirty. And I ran out of our house with kind of crazed hair and his open scissors, and there was a builder for our neighbor, and I just saw him kind of just rolling the window up in his car. So, you know, so it was sort of very passionate work, and you know, once again I gave my soul into it, and yeah, so we and done it with this pulse that people just doing.
Good, thank you. And Susan, can I ask you just probably as a last question before we open the floor to questions from the audience, including the online audience? What was your way into Babička, into grandmother? It's quite a, of course, it's different from translating individual tales. How did you go about it?
Well, again, I first become aware of it when I was doing my Czech texts, and I had 2 copies of the text at home. And then Mike asked whether I'd be willing to translate it, and I jumped at this because it was such a beautiful thing to translate. And I thought, once again, it could be a sort of gift to those who would not have read it otherwise, and also, in a way, a gift to the Czechs who I'm so very grateful.
And we should probably say here that yours is not the first translation.
No, there have been 2. And one of them was done in 1892 by Francis Gregor. And I was talking recently to Regenda Chitnis, who teaches Czech at Oxford. And he was mentioning that sometimes he mentions episodes from Babička to his students, and they look at him blankly because they've only read the translation and there are chunks missing from it. The first one I was aware of is where grandmother is having her hair combed by her granddaughter to look for lice, and this had been dropped from Francis Gregor's translation, presumably because she thought it was not refined, the kind you would not expect to find in a great literary classic. But it's part of village life as it was, and there's a kind of intimacy about this as well, and it's absolutely in keeping, so it's being kept in place. And then more recently, there was another one by Edith Pargeter, who of course has spent time in the Czech Republic and knows and loves it well, but that translation was made in the 1990s, so again, probably time for a new one. And I was hoping to have had it finished by now, but my experience with COVID was slightly different from Míla's, not nearly so creative. Basically what happened was that I caught it twice, possibly 3 times, the first time before testing was available. And the second time, it affected my spinal nerves. I wasn't able to get off the sofa normally. I had to roll until I could stand up again. And then I was diagnosed with level 3 osteoarthritis of the spine, which didn't exactly help. Plus the fact we also had a hole in the kitchen ceiling, that's another story. So I was trying to work on this chaos, but it has been something to hang on to, a goal, something firmly fixed that I'm not going to drop no matter what. And I'm pulling through the other side. I hope it's not going to be too long before it is ready to do, I hope, justice to Míla's wonderful illustrations. And again, make this available to those who might not have read it, or even worse, have read a less than adequate translation, being put off by it. Because there is, as you were saying, this very real danger of being put off something by its status as a classic. I think many of us are given Shakespeare to read at far too early an age, or started off with the wrong play, and that puts his cause back with us for years and years. And a couple of weeks ago, I was at a performance of Othello in Oxford. And we hadn't intended to go to an afternoon performance, but to an evening one. But because of a mistake with the online booking, we ended up going in the afternoon. It was full of school parties, which can be horrible. You know, that they're talking through it, they're dropping their ice creams down your neck and so on. But that didn't happen. They were all absolutely riveted. And I think the test of a good translation, as of a good production, is that although you know how it is going to turn out, you almost feel it could go otherwise, that perhaps Victorka is not going to come to grief, that it might have a happy ending. Or in this case, the audience gasped with palpable horror at the moment when Iago kills Emilia. They must have known it's going to happen. But this was such a fresh and vivid rendering that it really hit them hard. And at the end, they were standing up, they were cheering, they're on their feet and giving a standing ovation. And if this was not a stale classic, very much as you were saying with Kytice, that there is hope for a younger generation. If they can have a fresh, vigorous, vibrant translation available to them, then this is going to win a whole new generation of readers. And that, I hope, is what we'll be able to do.
Yes, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. And we're looking forward to the translation of Babička. So thank you very much.